if I ventured in the slipstream.
Okay, Aaron, so we're here for our third session of prolonged exposure. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right.
Doing okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, so today what we're going to do, we're going to just start by reviewing the homework assignment that you had over the week, your in vivo exposure. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing next. As you know, today is going to be our first session of Imaginal Exposure. So we're going to talk a little bit about the rationale for that, why we're going to be working on this in therapy. I'll give you a chance to ask any questions, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the first Imaginal Exposure. Before we get started, and after that too, we'll have a chance to kind of talk about how that went for you, so that when you're leaving here, you're feeling like you at least have some kind of sense of how that went and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But before we get started with that, how did that homework go this week? I know that you were supposed to go to Target.
I did. I went to Target, and when I first got in there, I was a little nervous, and then it started to get a little bit more crowded, and I felt like things were kind of caving in on me, and so I got more nervous. But as I kind of stuck it out, it kind of alleviated.
Wow. Okay. So you were able to stick it out even though your anxiety started getting kind of high.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So tell me about it. Like, so you wrote it down. What was your SUDs when you first went into Target when you started?
20.
Okay. And then how high did it get at the peak?
When it started getting really crowded, it got up to about a 40.
Okay. All right. And so you stuck it out. You stayed. Did you stay until your SUDs started to come down?
I did.
Okay.
I got down to 35.
Awesome. Great. So how was that for you to, when you left, you actually felt your anxiety go up and then habituate a little bit? How was that for you when you finished?
It felt rewarding, and I felt good about myself for sticking it through.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. You think that's something that you can try again this week?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So a little bit later, we'll talk a little bit more about what other things you can do this week to kind of challenge yourself. But I'm really glad that you did that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next thing, like I said, that we're going to be doing today is really getting into the Imaginal Exposure. And I know that we talked a little bit about what this is all about on the first session, and we've been talking about it a little bit from each session. And I really wanted to go back through and just make sure that we're on the same page about what's going to be going on today. And you've had a chance, which is awesome, to go through the in vivo exposure and get that feeling of your anxiety kind of peaking and then coming down. And so now what we're going to be doing in the Imaginal Exposure is to have a chance for you to experience the anxiety that's associated with actually remembering your trauma. So going to Target, something that kind of reminds you of the trauma a little bit, is this situation that actually makes you feel anxious. But now going back and kind of re-experiencing the actual memory is a different type of exposure. And there's a number of reasons why we feel like that's important and why we feel like that is helpful in therapy, even though it's challenging. So one important reason that we're going to be doing this is it really allows you to process that trauma that happened to you. As we had talked about kind of in that first session, when people experience a traumatic event, there's a lot of kind of emotion that happens, and I know in combat sometimes you don't even have the chance to really understand what was happening to you. You may have to just kind of do your job and think about it later, essentially.
Right.
And what we've noticed with what we know kind of about PTSD symptoms is really, that avoidance, trying not to think about it, pushing that memory away, is what really kind of maintains those experiences, anxiety and those flashbacks and nightmares. We really like to think about doing Imaginal Exposure is that, the trauma is kind of written down in this book, and it's pretty scary. It's got some scary parts to it. And when you have these kind of intrusive memories or nightmares. It's like this book just all of a sudden gets open to just the worst page, and you're all of a sudden you're reading sort of the worst, most scary part of it. So your instinct would kind of be to just shut that book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You don't really get a chance to read too much about what happens because it's really scary. You kind of close it and push it away.
Right.
So in the Imaginal Exposure, what we're going to be doing is bringing that book and kind of opening it up and reading the story word for word through the whole thing, the scary parts and maybe the not so scary parts. And the helpful thing about that is that it really gives you a chance to process what happened, organize your experience in the memory. A lot of people notice that when they do this imaginal exposure and go through the trauma, they remember things that maybe they didn't remember initially. They're able to put the memory in context, kind of have that file folder where you have a place to kind of put that memory. And the other thing that I think people learn when they have experienced PTSD is that these, again, when you're opening that book to the scariest part, it really makes this memory feel like it's a very dangerous thing. I know you had said when you first came in that when you have these memories, it almost feels like you're back there and you're in danger, right? Yeah. So what confronting the memory in an Imaginal Exposure can do is, when you do that repeatedly, can help you to learn that, okay, these memories are unpleasant, but they're not actually dangerous. And that's sort of the same thing that was happening for you at Target, it sounds like, too, when you were able to stay in the situation longer. It sounds like your anxiety came down. I mean, what happened to your feelings about kind of being in danger in the situation at Target?
Well, like I said, when it started to become a little bit more crowded, I kind of felt like this, like hyper arousal, kind of the same sort of danger that I felt when I was, back there. But the more I kind of stuck it out, the more I was just kind of able to, I guess, think about it and realize that I wasn't in any real danger.
Okay, great. And so the idea is that the more times you kind of go back to Target, the more you get a chance to learn, okay, this reminded me of maybe at first it reminded you of a time where you were in a lot of danger, but over time you can learn that, okay, in reality this is a relatively safe situation. Mm-hmm. Same thing goes for the memory as we confronted in Imaginal Exposure. And as you know, the same type of process is going to happen as you confront this memory as you're imagining. So that anxiety, we expect it to kind of go up initially because, you're opening that book for the first time and really reading each word. But as you know, those anxiety responses can only last so long, and if you really stick with it, you'll experience that anxiety kind of peak and then start to pass.
Okay.
And so that's the reason why we're going to be doing this multiple times throughout the therapy. And finally, you had talked about how even just after this one homework of going to Target, you felt better about yourself, you felt like you could kind of handle the situation, you felt confident. How do you think you might feel if, after a few weeks here at therapy really confronting this memory, things are easier and you feel a little bit less anxious as you go through? I mean, how do you think you'll feel about yourself?
Well, I'm hoping like how I felt when I left Target, which was, I felt good about myself. I felt like I was actually working on this stuff that has been bothering me for so long. Great,
good. Well, and I have confidence that that's something that you'll be able to do too. Most of the folks that I work with, it's really neat to see how much confidence they're able to build as they go through. Okay, so do you have any questions about what I've said so far? Do you have any concerns about getting started with this today?
I don't think so.
Okay. So as you know, what we're going to be following today, our process, the steps we're going to take is for you to, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and recount, go ahead and tell me, the story, and you can start, where you think the beginning needs to start, and just tell the story as if you are experiencing it right now, kind of in the present, like for you to use the present tense, so say, I am, I am sitting in the Humvee, I see this, I see that. And then from time to time, I'm going to ask you to give me your SUDs ratings. So you remember those SUDs from before. So I'll ask you, just kind of jump in and say, okay, what are your SUDs ratings? And you can just call them out to me. You don't have to, stop and think about it too much. And remember that I'm going to ask you to go ahead and start from the beginning again once you get to the end. I may jump in and ask a few questions here and there just to kind of make sure that I understand what's going on and maybe probe a little bit. But I'll pretty much kind of stay within the background for the most part. And okay, do you have any other questions about how that's going to go?
I don't think so.
Okay, and we have your little tape recorder here, so you're recording. And so before we get started, why don't you tell me kind of what your SUDS level is right now?
Well, actually, just kind of anticipating this experience, I'm about at a 20.
Okay, all right. Then we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay.
And that should be all for now.
All right.